Hi, I am Mel Parham, and I am going to be sharing with you my views on advocacy for multilingual learners and the people that love them and work around them. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that then you can see my presentation. So, in my opinion, what does advocacy for multilingual learners look like? In my opinion, multilingual learners are the future of our world. They deserve to be treated as such. We're coming into an era where more and more people are moving to different countries. Businesses operate out of multiple countries, and therefore, people who speak multiple languages are really marketable in a business world. And therefore, our multilingual learners are already at an advantage over our single language learners. And therefore, we really need to truly teach them the respect and also to respect them for the work that they are putting into that. My job as an interventionist is to make sure that they feel celebrated and safe to learn all of their languages. I feel like so there's such a push in our school system where children are only being taught to learn English, and therefore they're losing their access to their home languages because so much focus is put on them speaking English. And so I think it's really important that we look at our students as an entire picture and not just as someone who's learning English. So, in the different areas across my life, how can I advocate for them better? So, when I look at coworkers or my administration, I find myself wanting to push against the belief that they have to only develop their English skills. I've heard it said, like, well, that English is the language they need to be here in America. That's the language they need. That may be true to some extent, but they also need their home languages. And therefore, we need to be encouraging them to develop those skills as well and not to lose the language that they already have, but to still be able to develop that language both at home and also here at school. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see that being best suited and how we can make that possible here in a classroom setting. I also want to help their whole families to feel like they belong to our school. I oftentimes feel like you look at a school population and you have like little segregated groups that form. And I want to make sure that everyone feels like this is their school and it's their community and they're supported and welcomed here. And no matter what language they speak, and that there are ways to celebrate and be together without speaking the same languages. In terms of advocating for MLLs outside of my specific building, I often find that teaching at the school I'm at, we only have 7% of our students are Caucasian. So the majority of our students are bilingual or multilingual. And so there's oftentimes like almost a pity that's placed around our school of, oh, that's such a hard school. I can't believe you work there. And I want to fight back and advocate for the amazingness that is in this building, the way that our students support each other and their cultures and truly do like learn from each other, both in different languages and their cultures and practices and the things that they respect in each other. It's just a beautiful environment. And therefore, I want to stand up for our student population and fight against like the pity that people sometimes feel when I tell them where I work. So as I look at how I can advocate for our MLL students, I came up with some action steps that I intend to take place in my life, and I've already started for many of them. So the 5 action steps that I really want to, that we'll be looking at is encouraging and allowing more translanguaging in my classroom, helping plan for more community events, learning more math terms, and I'll explain that one in a deeper mentality, and then advocating for our MLLs with their homeroom classroom teachers, and also encouraging word-rich classrooms, both in my own setting, but then also in the settings of their home classrooms. So when I look at more translanguaging, I really find that this is something that I have to encourage and advocate for outside of my classroom. except for when it comes to my math groups. So when I'm teaching my reading groups, I am teaching phonics in the English language, and it's hard to be able to do that in a translanguaging mentality. I try to find, when we're using like vocabulary, that's an area where then I find students translanguaging very easily in my classroom. So I want to make sure that I continue to like open that avenue of like, help me explain this to a student who's newer to English. So in class, I want to encourage students to also just speak and communicate together in their home languages. And so there's different ways to do that, but I especially help them in my math groups. So in my math groups is where I really encourage the use of translanguaging, especially when it comes to like when they're struggling with a math concept, it doesn't help them to also be struggling with the language they're processing that math concept in. And so when they're doing things that involve like computing, I really do encourage them to do their math work in their home language. So sitting at my tables during my math groups, it's always very beautiful and full of different languages as they're computing in their home languages. I also want to be more confident and for students to feel confident in speaking in home languages and just like a friend group. I feel like sometimes we as teachers are concerned that they're like talking about us. Well, the reality is that if a student's talking about us, they're going to talk about us in English too. And so we as teachers need to let go of that need to have like a control over their friendship conversations and allow them to process their emotions towards teachers, whether that be in English or in their home language. And the quote that I found in terms of this is, it is this drawing out of differences that acknowledges that the diversity of a class is an attribute to build on that shapes the translanguaging in this unique classroom. It's pointing out that our students are different. Our students are different, not just in their languages, but in everything about them. We don't stifle their other differences, so why do we try to stifle out their language differences? We are lucky enough to have a community liaison in our building, but I want to help with planning for our community events. So I want to be able to do more volunteering in that sense, and even just if it's helping to prepare flyers or that sort of thing for our different events. And I also, in our community events, find myself always being like, oh, I'll go to the next one. Well, I want to actually start going to the next community event and interacting with our families and finding ways to be a part of those communities. A multicultural event can be an effective way to bring together community members and celebrate the cultures that make up that community. And this is not just the community around our building, it's the community here in our building. Our students should be celebrating together their differences and their multilingualism. Making up words now. All right, vocabulary. This is where I was really, this is a huge one for me. So as a math interventionist, I spend, like I said, a lot of time where I encourage my students to speak in other languages in their home languages as they're computing math problems. And so I took a few years of Spanish in high school, and so I'm able to count and do those sorts of things, but I really want to be able to learn and put more emphasis on learning math terms in terms of so that then I can assist more as they're processing the math computations that they're working on. And I also would love to be able to learn math terms in additional languages, especially in Swahili. Swahili is the second main language that's spoken in our building. And so we have a Swahili translator in the building, and I've already emailed her in regards of looking at having some lessons on being able to help them to feel comfortable speaking in Swahili in my classroom, knowing that I can help them in Swahili as well. For emergent bilinguals, translanguaging means of understanding, expressing, and building relationships. It's more than a scaffold to English. It is a way of releasing students' voices. As we look at them speaking in their own languages, they're more easily able to communicate. And so if we allow that initial conversation to take place in their home languages, it allows their voices to be heard, and then they can process that and put it into English. But if we expect them to process it in English, then it's a lot harder for them to actually be able to do the full thought process. And so to make it more comfortable for them, especially when they're here in my classrooms. As I advocate for our MLL students, this especially comes in with advocating amongst our teachers. So I want to encourage teachers to allow translanguaging in their classrooms. I feel like oftentimes they are nervous or feel that they will lose control of their classroom. But I think it allows our students to feel more respect for their teachers, that their teachers are respecting them as a whole unit versus just as an English language learner. So I want teachers to feel comfortable allowing translanguaging. So I really feel like in order to advocate for my multilingual learners the most, it would be helpful if I stepped in and coached our teachers a little on what that could look like to allow for translanguaging in the classroom and how to use that in reading and writing and math, and along with just verbally processing, but how can we also use it in our writing and other ways like that? So I find that that's one of the things I would love to do to advocate for my students amongst other teachers. I also would love to think that our teachers don't realize how hurtful they can be when they're assuming that multilingual learners speak more English than they do. So they will oftentimes say like, well, I know they know what I'm talking about. They're really good at adapting. Our students are resilient and they do their best to fit in and to go along with what they should be doing. So it oftentimes does appear that they understand what we're saying. But the reality for many of our newcomer students is they have no idea what's going on around them. And it feels lonely and scary. And then to say that, well, like they know more than they let on, I don't agree with that. And so to be able to defend my students and stand up to coworkers is definitely something that I would love to do myself as we move forward. I also would another way that I want to advocate for my students and another action step is to have more word-rich classrooms, especially here in my classroom in regards to the math terminology. So I would love to have a more multilingual word wall for our math lessons that really focuses on the language that my students are speaking. Another thing that I also do is I teach social emotional lessons with all of our 4th and 5th grade classrooms. And I do posters in the hallways, but I think it would be really helpful if I could find a way to get those translated into other languages so our students can access that information more easily as they're processing things in a social setting. And so that's one of the other things I really would like to do moving forward. Although English is the main language of the curricula and the teacher, the classroom is rich in multilingual print. This is something that was said about another classroom that we read about, but I do think that this is something that I would love to be true in the building that I work in. So that even though everything is in English that we're learning, the classroom itself is uplifting and welcoming to all of our students, no matter what home language they speak and no matter how comfortable they are with English. So to end this presentation, then I know that moving forward, I have a lot of work to do in my own comfortableness with our multilingual learners and learning how to best serve them and help them in the community and here at school. And I look forward to continuing that work. Thank you.